Good morning, everyone. It is bright and early on Monday morning, and I am brewing my first cup of tea for the day. And I don't usually do this, but I spent a little time this morning. I just glanced at Prince of the Doom City 3's numbers to see how it's doing, and saw another round of reviews coming in. And I don't know. This one is an interesting book. Now, usually I do not actually speak to reviews that I'm seeing, because you know what, reviews are reviews and readers are absolutely entitled to their own opinion. And I still think that even with these reviews, everyone's entitled to their own opinions and their own reactions. But seeing some of the reviews coming in for this book is really interesting to me. Because of what I'm seeing readers reacting to. And I've been seeing some of this coming in kind of in the background before the book even published. But now that the book is out, and you should go check them out if you haven't yet, there's some really interesting negative reviews on this book, including the one I saw this morning, which was a 1-star review, talking about how they wish the main character was dead or would die. And, talk about a strong reaction. So, I don't know. I've just been thinking about that, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to do a little talk for my own peace of mind. Not really in defense of the main character of this story, because, I don't know, I don't think she deserves defense so much. She doesn't need to be defended. But I'd like to just kind of speak to the character a little bit more, because she is a very specific kind of character, and she was crafted in a very specific kind of way. And honestly, the reaction that she's stimulating in, a portion of this reading audience makes perfect sense for the kind of character she is. Sorry, I'm pouring my first cup of tea, so give me a second while I set this to brew and set my tea timer. But anyway, so I have all these thoughts in my head about the reactions I'm seeing to this character and my own thoughts about the character. And I thought, I'm just going to do a little talk. I'm going to just not defend the character, defend her actions, but just speak to the character, if that makes any sense. So right here, I'm going to tell you this will contain spoilers for Prince of the Doom City 3. So if you have not yet read Ensorcelled, which is book 3 in the Prince of the Doom City series, you probably do not want to watch this video yet, but I'll leave it up if you're kind of curious after you've read it and you're like, I kind of want to know the author's thoughts on this character a little bit better. I'll leave this up so that you can see it. You'll have to also excuse kind of the busyness around me, because it's early in the morning, so children are waking up and calling out for their juice. My oldest son has got his juice. He's talking up in his bed, but he's got his juice for the morning, and he's just reading some books. But cats are swarming, kids are calling. It's going to get a little noisy, but I'll step outside in a minute. Anyway, so I'm here to talk about Clara Darlington, the heroine in Prince of the Doom City. So, as I said, some reviewers are talking about how frustrated they are with this character, how she spends this whole book just spinning her wheels, and how she's so selfish, and how she just stubbornly continues to make bad choices in the face of the perfectly good advice and reasonable advice that she keeps receiving, specifically from the prince. How she's taken on responsibilities and failing to fulfill them, etc., etc., etc. And they're very frustrated with this character. So I've not made it really a secret that this book was going to be very hard for me to write, and it was. It was extremely hard for me to write. And honestly, it was the character of Clara Darlington that made it such a challenging book. In large part because I knew readers were going to respond to her very much like this. I knew that she was going to be very frustrating in this particular volume. But I also knew that it's a very important part of her story. It's a very important part of her journey that I couldn't skip. Not if I wanted to tell a complete version of the story that I set out to tell, which is a story, an allegory basically, of abuse and codependence. So Clara Darlington is the product of her environment. It doesn't take a lot of, careful reading into the text to gather the truth about her upbringing, that she was, the child of a very abusive household. Her father was, I think she says that he wasn't physically abusive to her, Though sometimes he would lash out physically, but he was physically abusive to her brother. He kind of more dismissed Clara. She wasn't really interesting to him because she was just the girl. And, her mother, again, this is all spoilers for book 3, so if you haven't read it yet, don't listen to this talk. But her mother was the abusive parent's enabler. She dedicated her entire life to trying to appease and make this obviously very narcissistic, possibly addiction, addict, substance abuser her husband happy, trying to appease and make him happy, which of course, like anybody who's known someone like this, like Edgar Darlington, knows that like he cannot be made happy. Like that is not something that you can physically do. But it's very easy when you get caught into a relationship like this, when you love someone like this, to think that just around the corner it's going to be better. And if you love them just a little harder and a little better, if you were a little better, that maybe you could fix them and maybe things will be all right. And you have enough good times. Like Clara speaks to the good times in this story a few times. Like we find out, of course it's now part of her nightmares, but we find out that there were times when her father was doing well, when he was satisfied with his work and succeeding, and he was in a good place and the addiction wasn't so strong. And again, so they had money and they lived out in a nice country home. And of course it's interesting because, again, spoilers for book 3, don't listen to this if you've not read book 3, but at one point when she enters into the nightmare realm, like the landscape is that of the good times in her life. It's the landscape of this like country home where they used to go on vacations. So, which I think is very interesting, very telling, the fact that the good times in her life are still part of her nightmares, part of the worst in her brain. Pardon me, that's my tea timer. I'm gonna just fix my cup of tea real quick. So anyway, so we see very early on, and that's readily apparent in books 1 and 2, much more so in book 3, that she is the product of a very abused background, an addict, a narcissistic father, and an enabler mother. And what happens, and I'm speaking not as a psychologist here, I'm not a professional in this field at all whatsoever, but I have, this is all speaking from personal experience and personal growth and study, and counseling that I have done, recovering from my own, not anywhere near as severe as Clara Darlington, but my own background of narcissistic abuse and enabling, and the really dangerous traits that I myself have had instilled in me since I was very, very young. Pardon me. So when I say that, Clara Darlington has acquired a lot of just instilled beliefs about herself, about her role, about what she is supposed to do, what being a good person means. I mean, they've been instilled since she was a child. This is something that she, believes on a deeply, imprinted part of her soul. And so what are some of those behaviors that we see? Well, we see with the character that she has a terrible savior complex. Now, here's the thing. Having a savior complex is not in and of itself a bad thing. I feel like, Clara has a very generous nature, and we see that illustrated in book 1, where she, hold on one second, I'm trying to step outside without letting cats out. Stay in, cats, stay in. We see in book 1 how she adopts the troll children, for instance. She immediately sees someone in need and sees other people ignoring that need, and she feels almost a compulsion to step in and take care of and offer home and help and heart to people who otherwise are just being ignored. So this savior complex has its good side. Does it mean that she steps in and starts taking responsibility for things that are honestly not her responsibility? Yes, absolutely. Is that always a bad thing? No. And I would argue that her relationship with the troll children illustrates that this side of her nature has a really good, virtuous, wholesome component to it. Is she now in over her head? Like, she's committed to these, like, 4 very needy children while she's also in this job that is extremely demanding and gives her basically no time. Yes, she's now also in that situation. But the actual impulse to help the needy children is that, I think that's a really good impulse. But then we start seeing the dark side of that generous nature. We start seeing how when you're in a really bad codependent relationship, those virtues in your soul, those things that you bring to the table that make you the good and strong person that you are, if you're trapped in a codependent relationship, those virtues very quickly get turned into vices. And that's what I'm trying to illustrate with the character of Clara Darlington in her relationship, specifically with her brother, with Oscar. Again, there's lots of spoilers for book 3. I keep saying this as people come in and out of this live, but I just want to be sure everyone knows that there's spoilers for book 3 in Prince of the Doomed City here, so I don't want you to keep listening at this point until you've read the book. If you've not read the book, come back to this video later. I'll leave it up for other people to see. Anyway, so her relationship with Oscar is a classic codependent relationship. And I think it's really interesting because she absolutely cannot see it for what it is, which again is very classic codependent relationship. Like, when you're in it, all you feel is the pain and the love and the responsibility and the heartbreak and the frustration and all these tangle of things all at the same time, and it's almost impossible to see, like, to actually step back out of it and see the reality of the relationship. As I have been, struggling to navigate my own codependent tendencies in important relationships in my life, I've been doing a decent amount of reading and studying and counseling, and one counselor that I read said that he has an easier time breaking an alcoholic's addiction, working with an alcoholic to break addiction and come to a place of health, than he has helping a codependent to see that they are codependent and that they need help and they need out. Because it's so easy, again, to make a virtue of your vice when you're codependent. Now, if you look at Clara Darlington, again, she's a classic example of that. She sees that her love for Oscar should be her primary concern. And there's a part of her that really wants it to be her, she's almost ignoring the fact that she's happier in the doomed city. She's happier in the library. She's finally in a place where she is getting to expand her abilities and her powers and learning who she actually is in a context where she can give and it makes a difference. And people actually can benefit from the strength, from the veritable superpowers she has, both as a creator and just as a kind and generous person. She's finally in a place where she can thrive and flourish, and yet you see her wrestling over and over again with the extreme guilt of that she almost feels she shouldn't be allowed to thrive because she knows her brother is not thriving. Pardon me while I have some of my tea. Anyway, so it's such an interesting dichotomy with the character, because it's almost like the more established and healthy she gets in the doomed city, the more she pushes back against it, the more she leans into love for her brother. And then, of course, you throw Danny into the mix and you see her savior complex really rearing its head. And I think her relationship with Danny is a really interesting one, because there's obviously a lot of codependence going on there as well, on both sides, because it's very possible to be codependent on each other. Now, Danny and Clara obviously share a real love for each other. I do think that there's a lot of real love there, but it has gotten so twisted by circumstances into something that, she knows. There are several times in this book, again, spoiler alert, there are several times in this book where she outright acknowledges she could never marry him now. And it doesn't have anything to do with whether or not she loves him or whether or not he's a good man, because I would argue Danny is a very good man. And I think that her love for him is sincere. But their relationship is not healthy. And the prince basically points that out, in, chapter 1 or whatever of this book, where he's like, he says something along the lines of, Danny has her in a box. He has a very specific view of who she is and what she can do, what her abilities are, what her limitations are. And the box he has her in is very much another, like, savior box. Like, he sees her as the victim, which to a degree she is. Like, she has been victimized by, the abusers in her life. Not just the Fae people who have stolen her away, but, her own family members. She has, she's been victimized. But he sees her that way. He sees her as a victim. He sees her as someone that he needs to save. And, and obviously Danny is another person who has got a very heroic heart and a kind heart and a generous heart. And, like, look at him, he's a doctor and he's working at a charity hospital. And, like, we get little hints about his background, of how he gives to his patients and, these, the underprivileged and the children and the people who are being, like, underserved and ignored. Like, these are the people Danny's serving. And so, he is another truly good heart. But his relationship with Clara is not good. It's not healthy. And you see that in, like, for instance, I saw one reviewer say that Clara just won't have an open, honest conversation with Danny. To a degree, yeah, she has hidden the truth from him. Like, she's not been fully open and honest with him, which is very, typical of a product, again, of a narcissist relationship, of a narcissist parent relationship. Like, you're brought up to hide your truth and to don't speak openly, honestly, especially if you're afraid it might hurt the other person. You're constantly, like, on the guard and don't want to say the truth. So yeah, Clara did take a while before she finally told Danny the truth, that she doesn't see a future with him. But she does actually, like, I do feel like that review is a little unkind, because she does tell him overtly that they can't have a future together, that she would never be able to marry him. I don't remember if it was in the last book, or I think it was this book, where she finally does, where she finally just tells him outright. And it's Danny's, honestly, it's on Danny that he won't hear her. And I also give Danny a lot of grace, because, the truth is, like, in this story, she's been stolen away to a Fae realm and put under, like, enchantment of obligation and all this stuff. It's like, if he kind of suspects that she's only saying this because she's been ensorcelled, you can't really blame him. Like, circumstances are like, that's a very likely possibility. So you really can't get after Danny too much for feeling that way. That being said, it is extremely frustrating and even devastating for Clara that it's like she can tell him outright and he will only hear what he wants to hear. And you have to wonder again with Danny, like, how much of his identity, again, just like with her, how much of her identity is formed around her need to protect and guard and shield and love her brother. How much of Danny's identity has been formed around his need to protect and guard and shield and all of that for Clara. So one of the things about a codependent relationship that I have been learning painfully is that when you start to recognize that this is the truth of your relationship, and you start to recognize the impossibility of having an actual healthy relationship with this person that you love, because you will just constantly be dragged back into these same cycles of hurt and frustration and damage, where you're constantly thinking, oh, well, if so-and-so would just make the right choice, then all of this would be fine. If so-and-so would finally mature and finally get their act together, if I could just love them a little bit harder, or explain a little bit more clearly, if I could, all of these things, like, you just get trapped in this cycle again and again and again and again. And it's very easy to not see the trap that it is, and to just see it as, well, this is what it means to love someone. But the reality is, and I give Clara a lot of credit, like, the reality is, because of how deeply entrenched those patterns are, the likelihood of having an actual healthy relationship with this other person is pretty small. Unless that person actually does, on their own volition, recognize that they need to get help and start seeking it out and doing the work. It can't come from you. It has to come from them. If they can't do that, then you will just always be trapped in that cycle. And I think Clara, she's not, like, able to articulate it yet, because she's not willing to face the degree of codependency in her own life yet. But I think she knows that with Danny, that they can never actually have a healthy relationship. As much as they love each other, as much as they would like to be able to have a future, their habit patterns of codependency are just, they run too deep. So, but obviously Danny, for her, represents safety for Oscar. And I think she acknowledges that. She spells that out pretty clearly in this book, that she sees Danny as her connection to Oscar, because she cannot be with Oscar 24/7, which she would be. If she wasn't obliged, she would be. Or at least she believed that's what she would always choose. We also find out, again, spoiler alert, in this book we find out that the prince is not actually obliging her to stay at the library, and she has to start wrestling with that. The fact that she is not actually forced to stay at the library, that she could choose to leave if she wanted to. And of course she doesn't actually want to. Which I think is a very, very interesting dynamic all of a sudden there. But like all through the book, you see her wrestling with, but if I could, I would be there for him, because, Oscar is my responsibility. Oscar is the one I love. Oscar, like, I would devote my whole life to his care. Which also goes to show how not only the Doomed City, but honestly just being stolen away by the Fae in general was about the best thing that ever happened to Clara. Because, man, does she need to get out of that relationship. But she can't see it. Like, for her, leaving Oscar in his sorrow and his addiction and his cycles of self-destruction, like, to leave him would be a form of death for her. It would be a form of death for her relationship with him as his protective sister. She would struggle with feeling like she abandoned him to just basically kill himself. And, and then if, the worst happened and he actually did self-destruct, like, she would, she's afraid of the guilt she would carry the rest of her life. And on top of that, she does have a sincere love for her baby brother. She adores him. And I think there's a really interesting part at the end of this book where the prince points out to, because we find out in this book, again, major spoiler alert, don't listen to this if you haven't read the book yet, but we learn in this book the source of Clara's Noswraith, that her Noswraiths always are born from a deep darkness in the actual creator. And you would think that because of her background with this overtly, like, abusive narcissistic father, that Clara's Noswraith would be born from that pain that her father inflicted. But her Noswraith is actually inspired more from the pain that she felt from her mother. Like, Clara obviously identified much more deeply with her mother, who's obviously like her. She's a caretaker, she's a giver, she's a kind, gentle, loving soul who's been caught in a codependency with her husband, and as a result, like, sacrificed everything for him, and including her children. And that's where Clara's pain is coming from. It's that frustration at her mother for not taking care of her children, not prioritizing them, not seeing their needs above Edgar Darlington's needs. And, that is the great source of her pain, and from that her Noswraith was created. And, again, talk about an allegory here. Like, this whole series is an allegory for abuse, codependence, and all of that. But the prince points out to Clara at the end of the book that these Noswraiths, even though you might think, like, overtly it looks like this Noswraith was a recreation, and a dark recreation of Clara's mother, of Emma. Like, that's even its name. Like, we find out its name is Emma. It's her mother's name. The prince points out that these Noswraiths are not actually recreations of, the original inspiration person. That it's not her mother. It's Clara. It's coming from her. It's birthed from her darkness. So while it might vaguely resemble her mother, and it might have her mother's name, it's not her mother. Like, it's Clara. It's her manifesting as this monster. And those of you who have read the Scarred Mage of Rosewood trilogy know that, Soren, the hero of that story, he theorizes the same thing, like with his own Noswraith, which had been inspired by his true love, not true love, but his first love, who had broken his heart, and he created a Nazareth out of that pain, and he theorizes that Helena, his Nazareth, again, it's not his first love. It's not the real Helena. It's him. It's his darkness that became this monster. So that all tracks. That means that, again, Emma the Nazareth is actually just a manifestation of Clara and what's going on inside her. Which, when the prince says this to Clara, and he says it, I mean, he's the prince, so he can be a little blunt, but I'd like to say he was pretty gentle. I think he's pretty gentle with her on the whole. He tries to be firm, but he's also pretty gentle. But Clara reacts really negatively to that implication that she and her mother are anything alike, which of course, like, they're a lot alike. Like, you start reading between the lines and it's like, yeah, they are a lot alike. But she reacts so negatively to that implication, and she even overtly says, my mother failed to protect us. She failed to protect Oscar. But I won't fail. I will protect Oscar. I will take care of him. I will do that. And she can't see at this point. All she can see is my poor little broken brother that my mother failed to protect. I'm stepping in. I'm taking action. I'm protecting him. I am different from her. And she can't see the fact that her mother very likely did the same things over Edgar Darlington. Edgar Darlington probably did not, he didn't spontaneously spring into being as this, abusive person, he was most likely the product of his own environment, where his own nurturing figures had failed him. And, and as a result, he turned into the abusive and damaging and self-destructing person that he is. And most likely, Emma Darlington, Clara's mother, felt the same way. Well, all these people failed him, but I won't fail him. I'm going to love him no matter what. I'm going to bring him back into health. I understand him in ways that no one else does. So, again, classic codependence. And Clara can't see the parallels. All she can see is, well, she failed Oscar. I'm not failing Oscar. I'm taking care of Oscar. I'm different. And she can't see that she's doing the exact same thing. That means she'll sacrifice her whole life to this person who can't even receive it. Like, Oscar can't be the healthy person she wants so badly to turn him into. He cannot be that brother, that darling little brother that she wants to protect. And what is she willing to give up to try to turn him into that? And it's heartbreaking, and it's sad, and it's also, again, I understand for the readers, it's so frustrating to stand on the outside of that relationship. And can you imagine how it feels for the prince? Because it's very strongly implied that he deeply cares for Clara Darlington, that he sees her strengths, that he sees who she actually is underneath this codependence and underneath these almost self-assumed shackles that she wears. Like, he sees who she is, the power she has underneath her repressed memories, and he sees all of this, all of that, all of who she really truly is underneath it all. He sees that, and he's obviously very drawn to that. And I think the interesting thing with the prince and the way he contrasts so sharply with Dany is, even though, yes, he does end up rescuing her multiple times throughout the series because, fantasy romance tropes, it's going to happen. He does not have a savior complex where Clara is concerned. He's actually a little bit scared of Clara, I think. He sees what she can do and who she could be, and he admires and is maybe even a little intimidated by that. But, he doesn't have a savior complex where she's concerned. He pushes her to try to face the reality of who she is and her situation. And he tries to push her to face the strength she could have. Now, can this also, is the prince also in danger of getting caught and embroiled in a codependent relationship? Yes, he is. And again, the allegory of the obligations is, if not an allegory for codependency, I don't know what is. But it also evens their power dynamic in fascinating ways, which I just love. But yes, the prince does run the danger of like Danny and like Clara herself and like a number of these characters, he runs the danger of also becoming codependent, of getting caught in unhealthy cycles with someone who cannot see how their behaviors are hurting other people. And we're going to be watching how that plays out very specifically in book 4, which is going to be another very painful book to write. Because the truth is Clara has to get worse before she can get better. Yes, readers, I do have a plan in place for Clara to get better. But it's going to get worse. It's going to get more painful, and it's going to get more painful for the prince as well, because he is going to finally enact what you ultimately have to do in with a codependent relationship if you want to break free. He is going to enact some of those steps. That I don't want to give away any spoilers, so I won't. But ultimately, again, like Clara is going to have to, she is going to have to recognize and then start taking action herself. She can't be pushed to do it by anyone else. She can't be made to see it by anyone else. So things are going to get worse before they get better for this character. So all that to say, this was an extremely hard book to write. It was very painful to write, just simply because it's coming from a very raw place in myself. Like it's very hard not to let your real life creep into your work. And when you've been spending time in recent years, like, you know, studying and, you know, seeking counseling and like facing the reality of relationships in your own life, like, I mean, all of that is still there and present in your head. So just like, you know, Clara's Noswraith stemmed from her own pain, Clara and the prince and all of these characters and all of the storyline itself, like, I mean, it's stemming from what's real inside of me. Like, these people are me. These characters are me. These situations are me. Yes, it's also a fantasy adventure. It's a lighthearted romp. It's got all the fun world building and the monsters and the action and all of that stuff. But this is also, you know, far and away, this is the heaviest story I have ever told. And, you know, and it's coming from someplace very deep inside of me. This is my own Noswraith, so to speak, coming to life. The funny thing is, like, this was not actually what I intended this book to be at all. Like, when I first planned out the plot, like, this was not it. I mean, like, all of the things that are happening are basically it, but everything got shaped around Clara's Noswraith. I realized partway into the development that I needed to come up with a very specific Noswraith for her. It couldn't just be this, well, she has a Noswraith and this is what leads to these things. I had to come up with a specific Noswraith, and this is what I landed on, was her Noswraith Emma. And everything else gets shaped from that. Like, you have to tell the complete story of, like, why would a person, because that's the other really interesting thing with Clara Darlington and with codependence as a whole. A lot of times, people who are trapped in a codependent relationship, and again, like, I myself have been in this position, they seem on the surface like they have it all together. They speak well, they're generally very kind, they're not the ones in the relationship who are, like, addicted to anything. They are unselfish and giving and loving, and so on the surface, Clara gives off this impression of being almost a vanilla heroine. And I love the moments throughout the series thus far where we talk about her assuming her mask, which is just this very calm and very, like, placid and even-keeled expression on her face, that she doesn't give away what's going on, what's truly going on inside, which is, we know, because it's a first-person storyline, like, we know the turmoil that's going on. We also know, because it's a first-person storyline, we also know how very unself-aware she actually is. Like, she is not able to view a lot of her actions through the same lens that we as an outside observer can view them. Like, she's only able to view from one very specific perspective. But anyway, all that to say, like, she gives the impression of being, like, the last person in the world who would create a Noswraith, of all people, Clara Darling. Like, no. Like, she's this sweet, giving, unselfish big sister character. Like, why would you, like, Soren Silveri from Scarred Mage? Yeah, okay. Like, he's this power-tripping, like, young, selfish, lusty mage. Like, obviously that's the kind of person who would make a Noswraith. Clara Darlington is the last person that you would expect to actually get caught in a storyline like this. Like, she's not that person. But that's what makes her so fascinating, I think, as a character, because her darkness is that deep. And the self-destruction runs that deep, and the ability to harm those that she loves runs that deep, and to never even see that she's causing that harm, it runs that deep. And it's, I mean, to the point of making a Noswraith, to the point of creating something that's like devastatingly destructive, like springing from her own heart, from her own id, so to speak. I think it's a really, it's a powerful story, but it is a painful story. So anyway, all that to say, when I see some of those negative reviews coming in about, like, they're just so frustrated with how stubborn she is. She is stubborn. She's also, she's deeply scarred. So it's hard for me to even see it as, oh, she's being stubborn, because, I mean, like, in my own relationship, like, like, you enter into a healthy relationship, like what I have with my husband, or what Clara has the potential to have with the prince. There is a part of you that will, like, as you start to see what a healthy relationship should and could be, you almost want to cling to what you had before, because if you don't cling to it, if you don't somehow make it all right, then you have to start facing the truth and consequences of everything else. And that's really scary. And I think you see that with Clara over and over again with the prince, where he speaks truth to her. He speaks health to her. He, like, encourages her on a path to truth and to health and to wholehearted living. And she lashes back at him because she does not want to hear it. And again, that's coming from a very true place too. Now, my husband is not necessarily like a sexy fae prince, though, I've shown you some pictures. I'm just saying. But no, he's been that person for me many times over since we got married, not before our marriage, but since we got married, of, speaking truth and speaking health and speaking wisdom and encouraging me to wholeheartedness and healthy living. And I have many times, I've reacted like Clara. I've lashed back and said, no, you don't understand, and no, you're just hard-hearted, and and it can be really scary to have to start facing, especially when it's somebody you deeply love and care about, that when you start facing the fact that that relationship might not have any foundation to move forward from, and then he's the one, like, helping you navigate that, it's very easy to start lashing out at him and see him as the villain. Because again, like, sometimes you don't want to move toward health, especially when it comes to loving somebody else. So I think that's one of the really interesting dynamics between Clara and the prince is, he continues to call her toward health and wholeness and strength. And yeah, it looks like just stubbornness on her part that she continues to resist him. But you have to understand that for her to answer that call, to take those steps, to move off of this path that she's been walking her whole life, of caring for this person, of loving this person, of breaking herself for this person, to step off of that path, would feel like death to her. Her own death and her brother's death. Like, it's almost impossible to do, which again, I think is why, like, again, the psychologist that I was reading just the other day, like, he said it is easier to help walk an alcoholic out of addiction than it is to walk a codependent out of a codependent relationship. Like, it's so hard to make them see the truth. So all that to say, yes, I can understand why readers are so frustrated. They're frustrated. She's spinning her wheels. She's doing the same. She's following her same patterns. It is a little hard to see, like, the negative review that said they wished she would die, because I think that's a little harsh. Like, I get being extremely frustrated. Also, like, yes, it is frustrating that Clara is not thinking about the doomed city first and foremost over her brother, which again, like, this is, entrenched abuse behaviors here. But I'd also like to point out that poor Clara, like, there's only 3 functioning librarians. Like, she is out there trying to turn back the tide with a bucket. Like, whether she stays or goes, the doomed city is doomed.
So, like, putting that pressure on her of how dare you step away from your work at the Doom City to follow this other thing that she feels she could actually accomplish. Like, I mean, like you do see in the book, like she does not leave to pursue her quest to save Danny until she's certain that, like, Andreas has had a full night's sleep and is prepared to take up the almost impossible like she's doing what she can. I also like to point out that there's hints along the way there that Clara's savior complex may ultimately end up being the salvation of the whole city. Like, yes, right now her savior complex is taking her in a very unhealthy direction, but we see hints that the good side of that nurturing nature, the good side, the healthy and strong, the warrior side of that assuming responsibility that other people won't, like the good side of that may actually be the key to saving the otherwise doomed city. But telling her that she's just wrong for not continuing to, like, try to turn back the tide with a bucket does seem a little bit unfair to me. Like, yeah, she has a responsibility to the library. Yeah, like, obviously she should not be pursuing these codependent relationships that she is actively pursuing. But I'd say give the girl a little bit of grace. If she wants to pursue something that she still believes she can actually accomplish, she believes she can save Danny, as opposed to doing something that she absolutely cannot. Like, she cannot stop the coming doom that is coming for Doom City. She can't, ultimately. So I give her a little bit of grace there. So yeah, saying that you want her to die, like, that was a really harsh review. And obviously, like, again, usually, like, I don't respond to reviews. I try not to take them seriously. I mean, obviously we authors, we're people, so when somebody says they hate your book, ouch, it's sad, but, everybody has their own tastes. This one was a little harder to take just simply because, like, what they're speaking to, why they wish she would die, is, again, like, the behaviors that are very carefully crafted into this character to represent a very specific kind of person and a very specific kind of, abuse dynamic, and something that I relate to very, very personally. So again, it's you have to take a moment as an author sometimes to separate, okay, well, they might wish the character would die. That doesn't necessarily mean they wish you would die. It's a little harder when you, like, relate very deeply to the character you've created, but c'est la vie. But anyway, I wanted to just take a moment and actually, like, speak to this character because she is actually very complex and she is very hard. And again, I knew this was going to be a hard book for readers to read. It was a hard book for me to write. And I'm telling you what, book 4 is going to be even harder because, like I said, things are going to it's got to get darker. But there is a plan for redemption. There's a plan for redemption for Clara. There's a plan for redemption for the city. There is ultimately there is a plan for redemption in place, and you can start to see, steps in that direction. So I hope that the majority of you will continue to give Clara some grace and continue to walk with her on this journey of, self-discovery that she's on, that is excruciating. And will continue to, see the potential that she has. And if not, and you throw in the towel at book 3 because you really just want the main character to die, well, thank you for sticking with me for as long as you did. I hope you'll try some of my other books that are not allegories for abuse and codependence, because I don't always write this. Anyway, now that I've got this off my chest, I'm hoping that I will be able to, get into my work day, concentrate on the book that I'm writing and not the book that I've already written, and kind of, like, leave some of these things to rest for a little bit. I hope it was interesting to you. I will leave the video up for other people to explore as they have time, and I will probably post it to my YouTube at some point. But in the meanwhile, I need to go finish my tea, get some breakfast for my babies, and get to work. So have a happy Monday, all of you, and I will talk to you again later. Bye.